Eugenic thinking permeated everything Davenport did. He went out of his way, for instance, to hire women as field researchers because he believed them to have better observational and social skills than men. But in keeping with the central goal of eugenics, to reduce the number of bad genes and increase the number of good ones, these women were hired for a maximum of 3 years. They were smart and educated, and therefore, by definition, the possessors of good genes. It would hardly be fitting for the Eugenics Record Office to hold them back too long from their rightful destiny of producing families and passing on their genetic treasure. Davenport applied Mendelian analysis to pedigrees he constructed of human characteristics. Initially, he confined his attentions to a number of simple traits, like albinism, recessive, and Huntington disease, dominant, whose mode of inheritance he identified correctly. After these early successes, he plunged into a study of the genetics of human behavior. Everything was fair game. All he needed was a pedigree and some information about the family history, i.e., who in the line manifested the particular characteristic in question, and he would derive conclusions about the underlying genetics. The most cursory perusal of his 1911 book, Heredity in Relation to Eugenics, reveals just how wide-ranging Davenport's project was. He shows pedigrees of families with musical and literary ability, and of a family with mechanical and inventive ability, particularly with respect to boat building. Apparently, Davenport thought that he was tracking the transmission of the boat-building gene. Davenport even claimed that he could identify distinct family types associated with different surnames. Thus, people with the surname Twinings have these characteristics: broad-shouldered, dark hair, prominent nose, nervous temperament, temper usually quick, not revengeful, heavy eyebrows, humorous vein, and sense of ludicrous, lovers of music and horses. The entire exercise was worthless. Today, we know all the characteristics in question are readily affected by environmental factors. Davenport, like Galton, assumed unreasonably that nature unfailingly triumphed over nurture. In addition, whereas the traits he had studied earlier, albinism and Huntington disease, have a simple genetic basis, they are caused by a particular mutation in a particular gene. For most behavioral characteristics, the genetic basis, if any, is complex. They may be determined by a large number of different genes, each one contributing just a little to the final outcome. This situation makes the interpretation of pedigree data like Davenport's virtually impossible. Moreover, the genetic causes of poorly defined characteristics like feeble-mindedness in one individual may be very different from those in another, so that any search for underlying genetic generalities is futile. Regardless of the success or failure of Davenport's scientific program, the eugenics movement had already developed a momentum of its own. Local chapters of the Eugenics Society organized competitions at state fairs, giving awards to families apparently free from the taint of bad genes. Fairs that had previously displayed only prize cattle and sheep now added better babies and fitter families contests to their programs. Effectively, these were efforts to encourage positive eugenics, inducing the right kind of people to have children. Eugenics was even de rigueur in the nascent feminist movement. The feminist champions of birth control, Marie Stopes in Britain, and in the United States, Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, both viewed birth control as a form of eugenics. Sanger put it succinctly in 1919, "More children from the fit, less from the unfit. That is the chief issue of birth control." Altogether more sinister was the growth of negative eugenics, preventing the wrong kind of people from having children. In this development, a watershed event occurred in 1899 when a young man called Clausen approached a prison doctor in Indiana called Harry Sharp, appropriately named in light of his enthusiasm for the surgeon's knife. Clausen's problem, or so it was diagnosed by the medical establishment of the day, was compulsive masturbation. He reported that he had been hard at it ever since the age of 12. Masturbation was seen as part of the general syndrome of degeneracy, and Sharp accepted the conventional wisdom, however bizarre it may seem to us today, that Clausen's mental shortcomings — he made no progress in school — were caused by his compulsion. The solution? Sharp performed a vasectomy, then a recently invented procedure, and subsequently claimed that he had cured Clausen. As a result, Sharp developed his own compulsion to perform vasectomies. Sharp promoted his success in treating Clausen, for which, incidentally, we have only Sharp's own report as confirmation, as evidence of the procedure's efficacy for treating all those identified as being of Clausen's kind, all degenerates. Sterilization had two things going for it. First, it might prevent degenerate behavior, as Sharp claimed it had in Clausen. This, if nothing else, would save society a lot of money, because those who had required incarceration, whether in prisons or insane asylums, would be rendered safe for release. Second, it would prevent the likes of Clausen from passing their inferior, degenerate genes onto subsequent generations. Sterilization, Sharp believed, offered the perfect solution to the eugenic crisis. Sharp was an effective lobbyist, and in 1907, Indiana passed the first compulsory sterilization law, authorizing the sterilization of confirmed criminals, idiots, rapists, and imbeciles. Indiana's was the first of many. Eventually, 30 American states had enacted similar statutes, and by 1941, some 60,000 individuals in the United States had duly been sterilized, half of them in California alone. The laws which effectively resulted in state governments deciding who could and who could not have children were challenged in court. But in 1927, the Supreme Court upheld the Virginia statute in the landmark case of Carrie Buck. Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the decision. It is better for all the world if, instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. Sterilization caught on outside the United States as well, and not only in Nazi Germany. Switzerland and the Scandinavian countries enacted similar legislation. Racism is not implicit to eugenics. Good genes, the ones eugenics seeks to promote, can in principle belong to people of any race. Starting with Galton, however, whose account of his African expedition had confirmed prejudices about, quote, inferior races, the prominent practitioners of eugenics tended to be racists who used eugenics to provide a, quote, scientific justification